Hello students, welcome back to our course on visual semiotics for visual communication. In today's lecture, we will first time try to emphasize on the word semiotics. You have been hearing this term semiotics or semantics used many times interchangeably, but we have never really got into details of this particular term or try to understand what it means. But today is in this class we will try to learn a little bit more about this term semiotics. So semiotics or semiology, this whole domain, or this is rather a discipline like you get physics, chemistry, mathematics. Similarly, semiotics is a discipline. It refers to a field of study related to a particular thing. Say for example, in case of physics, it is a field of study which is related to various laws and hypotheses related to physics, right. So in case of semiotics, the study of science is what is dealt with. Okay. So if we look into semiotics, what does semiotics look at it as? So semiotics sees communication as the generation of meanings in messages, or semiotics is related to study of science. So we in our previous lectures have understood and learnt about different modes of human communication. We have understood that there is always a message which is being exchanged or communicated through different types of media, and now the question comes that when all these things happen, they happen through some kind of science. So these communication involves such certain amount of science and interrelationship of these science and the meaning associated with this science. So semiotics exactly looks into this in totality. That's why we have named the course as visual semiotics for visual communication. So we do visual communication by various modes, and we design different modes of visual communication many a times, but that's not enough. There is certain amount of sign language or sign system associated with it, and hence we are looking at semiotics as a subject to deal with it. And remember one thing, as we said, that whenever it comes to meaning of signs, so semiotics just not stop with the system of signs, but it also looks into the meaning of these signs. And it is important to note a very small simple tip which we should not forget, which I have mentioned over here. Meaning is not static, it is an active process. So meaning is never static, it is an active process. What does that mean? Means that meaning is ever changing. It keeps on changing with time, with people, with culture, with society, with different other influences. So we will talk about that a little later when we look into the structure of semiotics. We will see that how and why we are calling it an active process rather than being a static process. So now, before getting into the structure of semiotics and getting into the detail of that, we will see how it evolved. So semiotics, the discipline, is relatively very new. So it's compared to many other disciplines, it's relatively very new. It's after so if you look at the time frame of when it was first coined, so Saussure was the key person he is known as the father of semiotics. And so only during the late 19th century or in the beginning of 20th century, Saussure coined this term and started his research related to this. And this whole semiotics, the study of semiotics, was revolving around in that time in literature, in linguistic. So basically what Saussure was trying to investigate is the relationship between different words in a particular string of word in a sentence, or whenever there's a literary notion or there's a linguistic notion, a linguistic piece, a sentence for example, or a group of sentences. So there you have different words which are there, and then there's a relationship between these words which create a meaning. Okay, so you say the rain is falling, and then you say the rain is falling heavily, and then you say the rain is falling heavily but it's very pleasant. So all these words coming together but making different meaning altogether. So that interested Saussure to a great extent, and he started deep diving what exactly or how exactly these meanings are created by smaller pieces. So that's the origin of today's semiotics when we are talking about, and which is the basis which took shape 100 years back. So that's the time when we have been looking at semiotic as a discipline. So now if we move forward, what is a sign? So we talked about sign, and semiotics is predominantly related to sign. So now we need to look into a little bit in detail that what exactly a sign is. Okay, so if you look here, a sign is an image, object, sound or action that stands for something else, including objects or concepts. At one go it might sound very confusing, I will help you understand that, but again let us read it once more. So a sign is, so what is a sign? Essentially a sign is an image, it is an object, a sound or an action. So first of all let us see what a sign is. So a sign could be an image. Okay, let us take it this way. So a sign could be an image, it could be an object. So a sign could be an image, like you are looking at an image of mine, or it could be an object like this, or it could be a sound, or it could be an action, okay, which stands for something else. Now that is where the catch is in a sign. Okay, so if I say that this is a sign, so this is an object, right? This is an object, and this is standing for something else. So this is standing for this, right? So then this becomes the sign. So this object at that moment becomes the sign for this object. So that's exactly what we meant when we looked at that definition. So again let us look at this definition. So a sign is an object, in this case we will refer to the pen, that stands for something else, which in this case was the bottle, which includes of course the object or concept. So in this case the other object was the bottle. So we have represented the bottle by the pen, and the pen becomes the sign of the bottle. So that's how the sign language works. It's somewhat, there's a codification and there's a decodification, we have talked about that. So it's now we can see how it all merges together and emerges into in the world of semiotics. So this is how the sign system works. Let me give you another example which is a very fond example of mine and which I always talk about in the class is when we talked about concept. We in here you have seen that we have talked about concept also. So a sign is a concept. Okay. So say for example when we talk about God. So when we talk about God, say G, O and D, what is this? This is nothing but an image. It's an image of an alphabet, another alphabet, another alphabet, which means something. So this means something. And what God stands for? God stands for a concept. Because I wonder if any one of us has seen God, but then there is a concept of God. There is a concept we all refer to, and this concept of God is given a shape by this particular image G, O and D, which is the text, but at the end of the day it's in visual form, and that stands for a concept. So this clarifies also another aspect where we are talking about sign as a concept. Sign also represents or stands for a concept. So there's not much ambiguity in this particular aspect now. So now we move on to another important thing, which is sign has a signifier and a signified. So very, very important thing in any of the semiotic books, in any of the books where it refers to semiotics, or if you read anything to do with semantics, you will always encounter this word signifier and signified. So let me write it down for you. So we will encounter this word signified, and you will encounter this word signifier. Okay. So now, though initially the words might look similar and might be confusing, but it's easy as I will explain it to you. So what is a signifier? A signifier which you use to signify. So the thing which signifies. So if we take the pen example, the pen was the thing which was signifying. So this particular object was signifying something else, right? So it was signifying or standing for something else. So this is the signifier. So this is signifier. So it is trying to signify something else and standing for something else. So this is signifier. Clear about that? Now let us look at what is signified. So now this particular pen is signifying something, right? So the thing which is being signified, the thing which is being signified. So as it is very clear from the terminology itself, the thing which is being signified is called signified. So in this particular case, the pen is the signifier, and it is signifying what? It is signifying this bottle. So the pen is the signifier and the bottle is the signified. So the bottle is signified by the signifier. So this is how, and both of them together form the sign system. So sign is part of both the signifier and the signified. This is according to Saussurian model, but we will also look at other evolved model later on, and which creates the genesis of the next generation or today's generation sign language. So now if you look here, so signs image as we perceive it. So signifier is basically the image or the object that we perceive. Okay, so it is the thing we perceive which stands for something else. And then another very important aspect is the material and physical form a sign takes that can be seen, heard, touched, smelled or tasted. So a sign, so for example the marks on a paper or the sounds in air, so all these are part of the sign. So the sign has an essential quality, and that quality is that it could be perceived. It could be perceived by various other forms. It's not just only by way of seeing. It could be heard, it could be spelt, it could be touched, it could be smelled. So there could be various modes in which the sign system operates, but in our particular case we are only considering the visual semiotics. So we only restrict ourselves to the visual domain, but just to make you aware that there are different other domains where the semiotics work as well, and many a times they work in conjunction one with another. So now let's look at one of the structures of semiotics which has been proposed by Saussure. So here we see that the signified is the mental model or the object to which it refers, so which I have already talked about. So in our case the signified was the bottle. So this mental concept is broadly common to all members of same culture who share the same language. So mind it that when we are talking about the signifier and signified and the sign system, it is cutting across the members of the same culture. Okay, so it is cutting across members of the same culture. So here if you look at this diagram, if you see that this is a tree, and tree is also a concept. If you look at that way, tree or the understanding of tree is also a concept which is there in your mind. So a tree is defined as a tree by its understanding which you have for its treeness. So maybe the green leaves, the trunk, the branches, so that gives you an understanding of a tree. Okay, so this is a overall concept, a thing which has green leaves, which has a trunk, which has branches, is a tree. So this is something which is being the concept which is being signified. But what is important in our case is not the tree being thought as a concept, that is anyway happening with us all the time in nature. But what is important for us here is we have assigned a signifier now. So we have assigned a signifier which is the word tree, that is why I have put it in a bubble, which is tree. As I say this, I am making a sound, it is nothing but tree, this sound, it is TREE, which is an abstract sound, an abstract spelling with certain kind of alphabets with it, but this is acting as a signifier which stands for this signified. So this is something extremely significant in human civilization, in human intelligence, where we not only understand an object and understand its concept, but we try to assign something else, we try to assign a different object or something else instead of this particular concept, in this particular case this word. So that sometimes helps us. Now we will go for another example, which is the ox example. Here I have shown you there are two symbols or two figures on your screen. So first one is this and the second one is this. So many of you might remember the game that you used to play when you were a child, right? So you will you remember this game. So is it out of that, or is it a word? Is it ox, ox? So in this particular case, let us take an example that this is ox, ox, right? But mind it, we have used one figure and then another figure, and they together have created a sound which is ox, right? All that we mean, all that we understand is this sound ox, and as soon as I say this becomes the sign, right? As soon as I say ox, it becomes a sign, and this ox as a sign stands for the real ox, stands for the real animal which we were talking about. Had it not been ox, so this particular symbol or this particular sign may have stood for this particular game, but we are talking about the animal over here. So let's take an example of the ox as an animal over here. Now one thing is very important, we have talked about that some time back. We talked about that it is related to people, it is related to culture, and it is related to society. We said the meaning is active, the meaning is not static, but the meaning is active. So here is the time now when we will slowly emphasize on that. So we have known that okay, this word ox stands for an animal, but now let's see how this aspect of activeness of meaning comes into picture. So now let's take an example of an Indian scenario where we are visualizing ox. As soon as I say ox, what is the meaning that you get out of it, or what is the visual imagery that comes into your mind? So you must be visualizing an ox carrying a bullock cart or ploughing a field, or on the Indian streets, or in a countryside, or with a farmer. So these are kind of imagery which comes to you as soon as I say this word. So this sign stands for an animal, and that animal in a particular scenario. So the meaning surrounding that animal is very different for an Indian. But say for example, the same ox is spelt for a Spanish citizen or a Spanish person. There perhaps ox stands for a bullfight, or stands for a vigor, it stands for killing or hunting expeditions, it stands for expeditions, gladiatorial actions, things like that. So the same sign which represents the same animal, so the signifier representing the same signified, yet there exists a difference in its interpretation of the meaning. So here comes an example where we see that the meaning is also changing with time, with society, and with other aspects. So now, putting it all together, there was another expert in semiotics, and his name was Peirce, and Peirce came up with a more holistic model where he tried to put together all the things we have been trying to discuss so far. So he has put together the concept of signifier, he has put together the concept of signified, and he has put together another very important aspect which we just talked about, and that is the interpretant or the person involved in interpretation who belongs to a particular culture or a community or a society. So, putting it all of them together, how it works is this way. So, you have a signified or the object itself, so that which is represented, and then this particular object takes a representation and thus is represented by a signifier. So, that which represents is signifier, or many a times is referred to as representamen, but we will refrain from using this word, but we will say that this is signifier. And then the signifier has an expression. So, it must be having some sort of expression which is perceived by the interpretant or the person who is observing that, and which definitely involves a process of interpretation. And this process of interpretation will only be complete when the interpretant has the knowledge of the object. So, it is very, very essential diagram and very important diagram in terms of semiotics. The whole semiotic understanding revolves around that, and it is pretty much simple to understand. So, you have an object which needs to be signified, it is called the signified, which is being represented by signifier, which is the sign itself, which has an expression which is perceived by the interpretant, and the interpretant perceives based on its knowledge of the object. So, this is how it all shapes up. Now, if we look at the tree example again, so there is a tree which is an object which is represented by this word tree, which has an expression which is the sound tree, which comes to the interpretant, and the interpretant has a knowledge of what tree is. He knows the treeness, and based on that he makes a judgment that okay, as soon as I say that it is a tree, or I say it is a beautiful tree, the interpretant can make a judgment that it is referring to an object which is a tree and that is beautiful. So, that is how the semiotic structure works. So, now we go to the next step where we look at how many types of signs are available. But before that, we will look at Peirce over here. So, his time frame more or less around the same time of Saussure. So, according to him, there are three types of signs or sign modes, which is the icon, index and symbol. So, there are three types of signs which are prevalent, which is icon, index and symbol. So, if we look at each of them, what exactly each of them are. So, iconic sign mode depends on resemblance. Okay. So, if I am trying to represent a bicycle by a scribbling of a bicycle, something like this. So, say for example, I am trying to represent a bicycle by this. So, this becomes an icon. So, it resembles a bicycle. So, in that case this becomes an icon. Or let me give you another example in terms of whenever we do signage for ladies and gents toilet, we use icons like this. So, these are basically representation or resemblance with the real life object. So, that creates the iconic sign, and generally we recognize it. When we look at it, we recognize it. Whereas, in case of indexical sign, it is based on some kind of physical or causal connection, and it has to be figured out. You have to be able to understand or make out there is a cause and effect relationship. So, you have to figure it out. So, I will give you an example. Say for example, the same toilet example, the signage of the toilet. Say for example, I represent the same toilet example this way now. So, I show the footwear of the different genders. So, this is a guy's shoe for example, and this is a lady's shoe. So, now you see this is icon of the shoe, this is icon of the shoe, but this is index of male and female. You understand the difference? This is the icon of male and female. This is icon of shoe, no doubt, but it is index of male and female, because there is a causal relationship, there is a causal effect that you are doing. Let me give you another example, the way we show danger. So, the way we show danger is we draw a skeleton and we put the bones over here. I am sorry about my drawing today, but this is the way we show the danger sign. So, there is a causal impact. So, why this happened? This is from death, and death means danger, and hence danger is represented by. So, this is an indexical sign. And let us now come to the last one, which is the symbolic sign. The symbolic sign is purely based on convention. There is no resemblance, there is no causal connection, there is only convention, and one must learn it. So, any kind of logo that you see is a symbolic sign, it is by convention and must learn it. So, say for example, let us take this same example. If we go by the same example, here this is a symbol, this is neither resembling anything, there is no causal effect to this, but this is a mere agglomeration of shapes, but by convention we know that one is male and one is female, and hence this is a symbol which stands for the toilet signage. So, these are three main types of signage, and this covers the entire landscape of semiotics, based on which our subsequent discussions will take place. Thank you for your patient listening.